Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Nelson Mandela. I'm here today to speak about collegiate student athletes and how I think they should not be paid. There has, throughout the last few years, been an ongoing argument not only in the NCAA and its board, but also in the everyday sports world about whether or not student athletes should be paid for playing their college sport. I, myself, am in college and am a huge sports fan, and I definitely still side with players not getting paid. I do not believe that student athletes should be compensated for playing the sport they love because it would be extremely unfair to some universities, sports, and genders, and these athletes should focus more on their education. It would be unfair to pay athletes because it would be extremely difficult to figure out how to pay each person for each sport equally. There is no way for every school to pay all of their athletes as much as some other schools, much less paying all of their athletes equally within their same system. Smaller schools, for example, would be at a severe disadvantage because they simply do not have the funds that would be needed to pay all of their athletes. Horace Mitchell, a writer for the U.S. News and World Report, states in one of his articles that only a fraction of the programs are profitable while most operate at a cost to the institution, meaning that most schools wouldn't even have the funds to pay their players. I also believe that women athletes would be put at a severe disadvantage if schools paid their players because the men would almost surely have more money. Krieger Meshafijan, a writer for the Journal of the Business Law Society, references Mark Murphy, the director for athletics at Northwestern University, in one of his articles saying, "Paying athletes anything beyond a scholarship would cause problems from a gender equality standpoint." He says this to point out that the men's athletics generate much higher revenue than women's, and so the availability for player compensation would be much higher in the men's sports department. It would be impossible to come up with a fair scale to base athletes' pay because it is also impossible to compare a girls' cross-country runner to a defensive back on the football team based off of time and other factors that they put into the team. It is a bad idea to pay student athletes because it's unfair in many ways, another being the even larger disadvantage athletes would gain over regular students. There are already enough gaps between athletes and students around the country. Athletes have many advantages given to them that most students would dream of having. It is estimated that athletes already earn between about $50,000 and $130,000 a year on scholarships and other tuition funds, which is a very significant amount. Paul Daugherty, an esteemed writer for Sports Illustrated, claims that athletes will have tutors and study tables. Athletes will have coaches who assign managers to act as human alarm clocks in the off chance the athletes accidentally sleep late. There's no way it would be fair for other students. There's no way it would be fair for the other students because the pay of athletes on top of everything else they already have is too much. The athletes, in the first place, are not primarily there for sports, but for education. Sure, sports are important to any athlete. However, it is extremely rare for a student athlete to turn pro, so it is most important to focus on education and where it can lead. While some benefits offered to athletes are fair, paying for them playing is absolutely not something that needs to be implemented in the NCAA. Athletes need to focus on their education first and foremost, and paying them would be extremely difficult and unfair. Being a student athlete has its benefits and is great for a lot of people, but the education aspect of these athletes' college career stands above all else, especially money.
Shot.